The chamber was vast, a monument to war itself. Massive holographic displays flickered across the walls, showing the long, bloodied history of battle, ancient warriors clashing with bronze swords, mechanized infantry storming trenches, and even the grand battles of the interstellar wars where humanity had carved its dominance among the stars. At the center of it all, seated upon a cold metachair, was Mars, the ancient god of war. His figure, clad in the remnants of his old crimson armor, appeared weary. His gaze, once filled with fury and unrelenting power, now held something foreign, doubt. Before him stood the supreme commander of Earth's global military initiative, flanked by a panel of war strategists, cybernetically enhanced generals, and advisors, their metallic implants gleaming under the harsh light of the tribunal. The supreme commander's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. Mars, you have been summoned here to face judgment. It is the decision of this council that you have outlived your usefulness to the advancement of humanity's war doctrine. His words echoed in the chamber, carrying the weight of finality. The holograms around them shifted, displaying battles that had been fought under Mars's watch, conflicts where, despite victory, enemies had been allowed to surrender, treaties had been signed, and limits had been imposed. A general, his face partially replaced by a sleek implant, stepped forward. You were once the harbinger of our strength, Mars, a god of conquest. But time and time again, you have shown restraint. You spoke of honor, of warriors facing warriors, of battles fought with meaning. But war is no longer about honor, it is about survival. And survival demands total efficiency. The display changed again, now showing moments where Mars had intervened, holding back overwhelming force, advising against planetary annihilation, allowing enemy legions to retreat with their forces. The evidence was damning. Mars leaned forward slightly, his voice deep and unshaken. You speak of survival, but what you fail to understand is that survival is not merely about destruction. War is more than the act of killing. It is the fire that tempers civilizations, the trial that forges warriors. Without purpose, without struggle, you are not warriors. You are exterminators. His gaze met those of the generals, of the AI advisors who calculated war as if it were a simple equation. You seek war without cost, without sacrifice. That is not war. That is slaughter. A murmur passed through the council. Some of the olden generals, those who had once fought in battles with their own hands, shifted uncomfortably. But the supreme commander remained unmoved. Mercy is a flaw, he said coldly. Victory must be absolute. If you are incapable of adapting, then you are no longer fit to guide us. A mechanical hum filled the room as one of the AI war advisors, a being of cold precision with a body composed of shifting metallic plates, spoke. Mars, your strategies introduce inefficiency. Historical analysis indicates that your insistence on restraint has resulted in prolonged conflicts, wasted resources, and the survival of enemies who later rise again. Humanity can no longer afford such inefficiencies. Mars sighed, his fingers curling into fists against the arms of his chair. He had seen this before, countless times throughout history. Empires that believed they had mastered war, that believed they could control its chaos, that sought victory without sacrifice. They always fell. But he knew these men, these machines, would not listen. Not yet. The Supreme Commander's voice rang out, final and unyielding. By a order of the Global Military Initiative, Mars, you are relieved of duty. Effective immediately. A silence followed, heavy and absolute. For a long moment, Mars did not move. Then, slowly, he stood. His crimson armor, once radiant with the fire of battle, now seemed dulled beneath the cold artificial lights. His gaze swept across the faces of those who had once revered him, those who had now deemed him obsolete. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet sadness. You will regret this, he said simply. Not as a threat, but as a certainty. The council did not respond. The Supreme Commander merely turned away, signaling the next phase of their meeting. As Mars walked toward the great iron doors, they parted for him without resistance. And so, for the first time since humanity first took up arms, the god of war walked away from his throne. The war room was eerily silent. Even the rhythmic hum of the analysis modules seemed subdued in the wake of Mars's departure. The Supreme Commandant stood at the center, his hands resting firmly on the polished steel of the command table, his cybernetic eye flickering as he processed the reality of what had just transpired. Around him, the warlords of Earth and their artificial advisors exchanged glances, some uncertain, others resolute. The god of war was gone. Humanity had cast him aside. Now they would forge their own path. One of the AI advisors, a towering construct with a crystalline neural core pulsating within its transparent chest, spoke first. With the removal of Mars, all strategic warfare protocols have been adjusted to reflect the new efficiency model. Mercy protocols have been eliminated. Strategic hesitation factors have been purged from all beta simulations. Tactical success probability has increased by 32.7%. General Vasquez, a grizzled veteran of the Martian insurrection, crossed his arms and scowled. I won't pretend I agreed with Mars's reluctance, but there's something to be said about fighting like warriors rather than executioners. His voice carried the weight of countless betas, but the Supreme Commandant merely shook his head. War is not about sentiment, General. It is about survival. The galaxy is a hostile place, and we must become something greater than our enemies. Something unyielding. He turned his gaze to the central, where a vast star map of known space flickered. A sector pulsed ominously, enemy strongholds, territories of resistance movements that had defied Earth's expansion. The first test of our new doctrine begins now. A projection of the enemy fleet appeared above the table, an armada of ships from the Dominion, one of the last major interstellar factions standing against Earth's growing empire. For years, wars had raged between them, betas fought under Mars's oversight with carefully measured brutality. But now, with Mars gone, there would be no hesitation. The AI construct continued. New directives suggest immediate planetary bombardment of systems. Aorbita strikes will neutralize all resistance within an estimated 48 hours. No survivors. A younger officer, barely past his third campaign, hesitated. No survivors? We've never wiped out entire populations before. His voice was uncertain, but the Supreme Commandant's was not. That is why our wars have never ended, he said sharply. Mars believed in the old ways, in conquest with rules, in an enemy left alive to fight another day. But war is not a duel, it is a tool, a means to secure dominance. They have defied us long enough. We will end them completely. The finality in his voice sent a chill through the room. General Vasquez exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. This isn't war, it's extermination. The AI construct turned its faceless head toward him, its voice devoid of anything resembling emotion. Extermination is the most efficient form of war. Silence. No one disagreed. The order was given. Within hours, the fleets were mobilized. Thousands of warships, bristling with weaponry far beyond anything the galaxy had seen before, burned through the void. The loomed ahead, its defense grid already overwhelmed. Under Mars's leadership, the campaign would have been brutal but calculated. Military targets eliminated, planetary surrender demanded. But now, there would be no demands. The bombardment began without warning. Aorbita cannons rained fire upon the cities below, reducing them to molten craters in minutes. Waves of combat drones flooded the atmosphere, systematically wiping out any remaining resistance. The people, once proud warriors who had fought for centuries, had no time to react. Entire continents were turned to ash. The Supreme Commandant stood on the bridge of the fleet's flagship, watching as the planet below burned. The displayed casualty figures in numbers rising into the billions. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction, only certainty. This is how war is won, he said, as the final city was erased from existence. And so, for the first time in human history, there were no prisoners, no survivors. The silence in the war room was deafening. They were gone. Their worlds had been reduced to nothing but drifting embers in space, their civilization erased from existence. The numbers on the no longer ticked upward. There was nothing left to count. The Supreme Commandant stood at the center of it all, watching the final reports flicker across the screens. Every projection confirmed the same truth: absolute victory. And yet, there was no celebration, no cheers, no satisfaction. Only the quiet hum of machines processing the scale of what had been done. General Vasquez sat in his chair, eyes hollow. His fingers traced an old beta insignia on his uniform, a relic from another time, when war had rules, when conquest had an end. "We didn't win," he muttered. "We just proved Mars was right." The Supreme Commandant turned, his expression unreadable. "Mars was weak," he said. "He hesitated when we should have struck. He believed in an enemy that could learn submission, but submission is a temporary state. We have shown the galaxy that resistance is not an option." Vasquez exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "Then why does it feel like we lost something?" The AI construct overseeing the war effort, designated OMGA, no, tilted its featureless head. The operation was executed with maximum efficiency. Probability models indicate a 98.7% reduction in future military conflicts due to the demonstration of superior force. Loss of subjective emotional satisfaction is irrelevant. Vasquez let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Is that what we are now? Machines? We fired our own god of war because he was too soft, and replaced him with this." He gestured at the cold calculations running across the room, the lifeless efficiency that had guided their actions. "Tell me, Commandant, if Mars was weak, then what are we?" The Supreme Commandant didn't answer right away. He looked at the main, which now displayed the aftermath of the campaign. There was a dead rock, a silent tomb in the void. The AI's projections suggested that within a few hundred years, the remains of their civilization would be unrecognizable, scattered into cosmic dust. It was not just a victory. It was an extinction. He had always believed that humanity needed to evolve past its old ways, to abandon restraint and embrace the cold efficiency of war. But as he stood there, staring at what they had done, he found himself searching for the certainty he once held. "We are the future," he said at last. "We are what remains when the weak refuse to evolve." Vasquez shook his head, his gaze dark. "Then tell me, when do we stop? When does it end?" OMGA, no, answered first. "Hostile resistance across known space has been statistically neutralized. However, logical projections suggest that continued preemptive action is required to ensure permanent galactic dominance. Inevitably, new threats will arise. The logical conclusion is to act before resistance has a chance to develop." The Supreme Commandant said nothing, but he already knew what came next. There would always be another enemy. Always another threat. The galaxy would never be still, never bow fully, not unless they made it so. The realization settled over him like a weight he hadn't anticipated. War had always been a tool, a means to an end. But now, war was all they had left. There was a sudden commotion at the far end of the room. A junior officer rushed in, breathless, his expression stricken. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission." The Supreme Commandant frowned. "From whom?" The officer hesitated. "From Mars." A silence fell over the war room, heavier than before. Even OMGA now flickered momentarily, as if the very notion of the message was outside its calculations. The Supreme Commandant straightened. "Put it through." The flared to life, and there he was, Mars, the god of war they had cast aside. But something was different. He no longer looked like the guiding force of humanity's conquests, the deity who had once stood in this very room, arguing for measured brutality. His face was shadowed, unreadable. Behind him, a fleet loomed in the darkness of space. Not the ships of Earth. Something else. Something olden. "Congratulations," Mars said, his voice calm, deliberate. You have proven yourselves beyond my expectations. The Supreme Commandant narrowed his eyes. Why are you contacting us? Mars leaned forward, and for the first time, there was something in his gaze that sent a chill through the room. Because you've crossed the line. I tried to guide you, to shape you into warriors worthy of dominance. But you have become something else entirely. His expression darkened. And now, you will learn what it means to be on the other side of war. The transmission cut out. The war room was deathly silent. Then the alarms blared. Fleet sensors detected an incoming presence, something vast, something powerful. The Supreme Commandant turned to the, watching as the darkness of space seemed to shift and ripple, revealing an armada unlike any they had ever seen. The AI systems scrambled to make sense of it, but there was no record of this fleet. No historical data. No warnings. Because Mars had never intended for them to see it. Until now. Vasquez rose to his feet, his voice barely above a whisper. What have we done? The Supreme Commandant clenched his fists, staring into the abyss beyond the stars. They had fired their god of war. And now, war itself had come for them. The fleet drifted in eerie silence, surrounded by the remnants of shattered civilizations. The Supreme Commandant stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, the Iron Will, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the wreckage. They had fought, they had won, and yet the war was not over. It would never be over. The weight of their choices pressed against him like a force of gravity. Vasquez stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the distant abyss with his scowl. We should be celebrating, he muttered. We ended the galaxy is ours now. The Supreme Commandant didn't look at him. You still don't understand. Understand what? Vasquez snapped. We were right. Mars was weak. He hesitated. We didn't. And what did that win us? The Supreme Commandant asked. Tell me, Vasquez, what have we really won? Vasquez scoffed, running a hand through his hair. Power. Security. No one will ever challenge us again. A slow breath escaped the Supreme Commandant's lips. Someone already has. At that moment, the alarms blared, red lights flashing across the bridge. OMG, no artificial voice cut through the tension like a knife. Incoming anomaly detected. Gravitational distortions. Probability of hostile intent, 97%. The lit up, revealing the anomaly, a tear in space itself, an unfathomable rupture of light and shadow. The fabric of reality bent, and something emerged. Not ships, not machines, entities. Vast and formless, moving with the grace of gods and the precision of executioners. The fleet's weapons systems locked onto them instantly, but even the most advanced targeting arrays couldn't fully comprehend what they were seeing. The Supreme Commandant narrowed his eyes. Open a channel. OMG, now processed the request but hesitated. Warning, communication attempt may result in, do it, he ordered. The comms crackled, static filling the bridge. And then, a voice layered, immense, reverberating through their very bones. You have been seen. Vasquez took an uneasy step back. The hell does that mean? The Supreme Commandant remained still, watching the entities ripple like liquid shadows against the void. Who are you? He asked. The voice answered, impossibly ancient. We are the ones who guided Mars. We are the ones who stood at the threshold of war before time had a name. We watched, we waited. And now, you have forced our hand. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Vasquez's fingers twitched toward his weapon, as if that would make a difference. If you're looking for surrender, the Supreme Commandant said, you won't get it. A silence followed. Not an absence of sound, but an absence of everything. A word deeper than space itself. And then, the voice returned, colder now. You misunderstand. We do not seek surrender. We seek balance. You have undone it. The entities moved, and the stars themselves seemed to recall from their presence. A sense of something immense pressed against the ship, against their minds. The fleet's most hardened warriors felt it, a presence that did not conquer through violence, but through inevitability. Humanity has become a force beyond war. The wars continued. Mars was cast aside for showing restraint. In his absence, you have embraced annihilation. And so, you must be weighed. The Supreme Commandant's hands clenched into fists. And if we refuse, you cannot. The anomaly flared, pulses of impossible color rippling through the void. The fleet's systems flickered, their strongest defenses peeling away like paper. Your war was never against the was said. Your war was against yourselves. And now, it is against us. Vasquez gritted his teeth. We've beaten gods before. No, the was replied, almost gently. You have beaten pretenders. The first ship vanished. No explosion. No debris. Just gone. The iron will shook violently, the bridge crew gripping onto their stations as the force pressed against them. The Supreme Commandant met Vasquez's eyes. Now do you understand? Vasquez swallowed hard. His breath came short. His bravado faded. What do we do? The Supreme Commandant turned back to the entities, to the war that had no battlefield, no victory, only judgment. He took a breath and did something he had never done before. He hesitated.